Blood pooled on the pristine linoleum of Trauma Room 3, a stark, terrifying crimson against the sterile white. The chief of surgery had already walked away, stripping off his gloves and declaring the man on the steel table a ghost. But Kara Jennings heard it, a faint, stubborn flutter on the cardiac monitor that everyone else chose to ignore. She knew the man bleeding out was Phoenix's most ruthless syndicate boss. Saving him meant crossing a fatal line. She grabbed the defibrillator anyway. The relentless fluorescent lights of St. Jude Medical Center flickered with a low, menacing hum. It was 2:14 a.m. on a Friday, the witching hour in downtown Phoenix, where the city's darkest secrets inevitably washed up on the emergency room floor. Kara Jennings, a 24-year-old rookie trauma nurse, was barely 6 months out of nursing school. She had dark circles under her eyes, her blue scrubs stained with coffee and iodine, but her hands were remarkably steady. She was meticulously restocking the crash cart when the heavy double doors of the ambulance bay blew open. There were no sirens, no standard paramedic handoffs. Instead, 3 matte black SUVs had violently hopped the curb, screeching to a halt just inches from the glass doors. 6 men in ruined, blood-soaked designer suits stormed into the triage area. They carried a makeshift stretcher constructed from a shattered door panel. "Clear the fucking room!" bellowed a mountain of a man with a shattered nose and a customized Glock 19 waving recklessly in his left hand. This was Vincent Castellano, the infamous enforcer for the Russo crime family. The ER waiting room, previously occupied by minor fractures and late-night flu cases, evacuated in a chorus of terrified screams. Kara froze her fingers gripping a box of sterile gauze. Head nurse Beatrice Gable, a hardened veteran of 30 years, immediately hit the panic button under the desk, but Vincent slammed his fist down on the console, shattering the plastic casing. "Nobody calls the cops. Nobody leaves." Vincent growled, his eyes wild and bloodshot. He pointed his weapon at the chief attending physician, Dr. Arthur Pendleton. "You fix him, Doc, or this hospital burns to the ground." They shoved the makeshift stretcher into Trauma Room 3. Kara was swept up in the chaotic tide, pushed into the room by the sheer force of the mobster's advance. Lying on the table, barely recognizable under a mask of his own blood, was Dominic Russo. At 32, he was the undisputed king of the Phoenix underworld, a man whose whispered name commanded city councilmen and police chiefs alike. Right now, however, he was just a piece of shredded meat. 3 bullet wounds mapped a jagged path of destruction across his torso. One had entered his right shoulder, pulverizing the clavicle. Another had torn through his abdomen, creating a catastrophic exit wound in his lower back. But it was the third wound, a tight, bubbling hole just millimeters from his sternum, that was rapidly pulling him into the abyss. "Move! Let me see him!" Dr. Pendleton barked, his initial fear overridden by decades of medical instinct. Kara jumped into action, her scissors slicing through Dominic's $3,000 bespoke jacket and silk shirt, exposing his heavily tattooed, perfectly muscled yet violently broken chest. "Pressure is tanking 40 over palp," Kara yelled, reading the monitor as she slapped standard leads onto his sticky crimson skin. "We need O-negative massive transfusion protocol now. Get 2 large-bore IVs in his ACs," Pendleton commanded. The room became a blur of controlled panic. Kara managed to find a vein in Dominic's left arm. Despite the severe hypovolemic shock collapsing his circulatory system, she pushed the fluids, praying it would buy them seconds, but Dominic Russo was drowning in his own blood. The monitor wailed a high-pitched, desperate alarm. "He's in V-fib," Kara shouted, reaching for the paddles. "Charge to 200, Pendleton ordered. Clear." The shock lifted Dominic's massive frame off the table. He slammed back down. The monitor registered a flatline, a solid, unforgiving tone. "Push 1 milligram of epi," Pendleton said, his voice tightening. Kara injected the adrenaline. Pendleton started chest compressions, the sickening crunch of already broken ribs echoing in the sterile room. 2 minutes passed. 4 minutes. The floor was slick with Dominic's blood. Vincent paced like a caged tiger near the doorway, muttering frantic prayers in Italian, his gun still loosely gripped. "Doctor," Nurse Beatrice warned softly, looking at the clock. It had been 12 minutes of zero cardiac output. Even if they brought him back, his brain would be mush. Dr. Pendleton stopped compressions, his chest heaving, his scrub cap stained with sweat and blood. He looked at the catastrophic damage to Dominic's chest, then over at the flatline. He knew the politics of the city. He knew saving Dominic Russo meant inviting a war into his recovery wards, but more importantly, he knew medical futility when he saw it. The man was exsanguinated. There was nothing left to pump. Time of death. Pendleton said, his voice trembling slightly as he avoided Vincent's lethal gaze. 2:28 a.m. A deafening silence fell over Trauma Room 3. Vincent stopped pacing, his face drained of color, replaced by a terrifying, hollow rage. "What did you say?" "I'm sorry," Pendleton said, backing away from the table, raising his hands. "The damage to his descending aorta, it's too massive. He bled out before he even hit the doors. He's gone." Vincent lunged, grabbing the senior doctor by the throat and slamming him against the cabinet of medical supplies. Glass shattered. Kara screamed, but the other mobsters blocked the exit. "You fix him!" Vincent roared, spit flying from his lips. Vinny, stop!" one of the younger mobsters yelled, pulling at the enforcer's massive shoulders. "The cops are going to be here any second. We gotta go, man. The boss is gone. We have to secure the territory." Vincent stared at Dominic's lifeless face. The mobster's brutal logic cut through his grief. If Dominic was dead, the streets would erupt within the hour. They needed to lock down the family's assets. He dropped Dr. Pendleton, who collapsed to the floor, gasping for air. "Leave him," Vincent ordered, his voice suddenly dead and hollow. "We ride." Within seconds, the mobsters vanished, the screech of tires echoing into the Phoenix night. The ER was left in stunned, terrified silence. Dr. Pendleton, clutching his bruised throat, looked at Beatrice and Kara. "Call the morgue," Pendleton rasped, adjusting his glasses. "And call the police. Tell them to send a detail. I'm going to wash my hands." He walked out. Beatrice followed to manage the chaotic waiting room. Kara was left alone with the body of the city's most dangerous man. The silence in the room was heavy, smelling of copper and antiseptic. Kara picked up a wet towel, intending to clean the blood off Dominic's face before the coroner arrived. It was the least she could do. Monster or not, no one deserved to die like a butchered animal on a cold steel table. She gently wiped the crimson from his jawline, revealing sharp aristocratic features beneath the grime. He didn't look like a killer in death, he just looked incredibly tired. As she leaned in to clean his neck, Kara froze. It was faint. So faint she thought her own adrenaline was playing tricks on her. But there, it was a microscopic twitch in his right jugular vein. She dropped the towel and stared at the monitor. It was still a flat line. But monitors could be wrong. Leads could disconnect in a sea of blood. She pressed her bare fingers against his carotid artery. For 10 agonizing seconds there was nothing. Then a weak, thready flutter against her fingertips. He's not dead. Kara's eyes darted to his chest. The chest wound near his sternum wasn't just a bullet hole. The tissue around his neck was violently swollen, and his trachea was deviated slightly to the left. Tension, pneumothorax. Kara realized with a jolt of horror and a pericardial tamponade. Pendleton had missed it in the chaos. The bullet hadn't shredded the aorta, it had nicked a smaller vessel and pierced the lung. Air and blood were trapped in his chest cavity, squeezing his heart so tightly it couldn't pump, mimicking cardiac arrest. If the pressure wasn't relieved, he really would be dead in less than 2 minutes. "Dr. Pendleton." Kara screamed toward the hallway. "Dr. Pendleton, get back here." There was no answer. The hallway was empty. The entire staff was either hiding or dealing with the police in the lobby. She looked down at Dominic. The fluttering pulse was fading. It was now or never. "God forgive me," Kara whispered. She wasn't a surgeon. She wasn't legally allowed to perform invasive procedures. Doing this could strip her of her license, land her in prison, and tie her to the Mafia forever. But the oath she took was to save lives. Period. She ripped open a sterile kit and grabbed a massive 14-gauge needle, the longest one she could find. She didn't have time for anesthesia. She didn't have time for a scalpel and a chest tube. She found the second intercostal space on his right chest, wiped it with a swipe of betadine, and drove the needle deep into the muscle and pleural space. A sharp, violent hiss echoed in the room as trapped air forcefully escaped through the needle hub. Blood bubbled up immediately. Suddenly, the flat line on the monitor broke. It spiked into a chaotic waveform, then settled into a rapid thumping sinus tachycardia. The machine began to beep rapidly, the sweetest sound Kara had ever heard. Dominic's massive chest heaved. A ragged, agonizing gasp tore from his throat. His eyes flew open. They were ice blue, devoid of warmth and utterly terrifying. Even through the fog of near death, his gaze locked onto Kara with the intensity of an apex predator. His large, blood-stained hand shot up his fingers, clamping around Kara's wrist with a grip that threatened to snap her bones. "Shh, it's okay," Kara said rapidly, her heart hammering against her ribs. "You were dying. I just saved your life. You need to let go so I can work." He didn't speak, but his grip slowly loosened. He was fighting to stay conscious. Kara didn't stop. She grabbed a pericardiocentesis kit. The tension in his lung was relieved, but the blood compressing his heart was still a massive threat. Utilizing the ultrasound machine, she guided a long needle just below his sternum, aiming for the sac around his heart. She drew back the plunger on the syringe, pulling out 50 cubic centimeters of dark clotted blood. Instantly, Dominic's blood pressure began to climb. The color returned to his ashen lips. "What the hell are you doing?" Kara whipped around. Dr. Pendleton was standing in the doorway, staring at the scene in absolute shock. He looked from the monitor to the massive needle protruding from Dominic's chest to Kara's blood-soaked hands. "He had a tension pneumothorax and a tamponade," Kara said, her voice shaking but defiant. "You called it too early, doctor. He had a pulse." "You performed an unauthorized surgical intervention," Pendleton yelled, stepping into the room. "You're a nurse, Jennings. You could have killed him. I pronounced him. He's alive," Kara shot back. "Look at the monitor. We need a cardiothoracic surgeon down here immediately. He still has active internal bleeding." "I am not dragging this hospital into a gang war because you decided to play God," Pendleton sneered, marching toward the table. "Pull that needle out. We let him slip away. It's safer for everyone." Kara stood her ground, physically placing herself between the angry doctor and the Mafia Boss. "I won't let you murder him." "Step aside, Kara. You're fired, as of this second." "She stays right where she is." The voice was low, rough, and dripping with lethal promise. Both Kara and Pendleton froze. Standing behind the doctor was Vincent Castellano. He hadn't left the city. He had circled back, refusing to leave his boss's body behind. Now, his massive frame filled the doorway, and the barrel of his Glock was pressed directly against the back of Dr. Pendleton's skull. "You missed the heartbeat, Doc." Vincent whispered, his eyes locked on Kara with a mix of awe and dangerous calculation. But the little nurse didn't. "Now you're going to call your best surgeon down here. You're going to fix my boss. And if he dies on that table, I kill everyone in this building." Pendleton swallowed hard, a bead of sweat tracing down his temple. "Paging surgery," he choked out. Vincent finally lowered the gun, stepping past the trembling doctor. He approached the surgical table, looking down at Dominic, whose eyes were fluttering closed again from the pain and blood loss. Vincent looked up at Kara. "What's your name, sweetheart?" "C. Kara Jennings." "Well, Kara Jennings." Vincent said, a dark, humorless smile touching his lips. "Congratulations on the promotion. You belong to the Russo family now." The next 48 hours were a masterclass in medical blackmail. St. Jude Medical Center was quietly, efficiently placed under mafia lockdown. The entire fourth-floor VIP wing was cleared out. Heavily armed men in discreet suits sat in the waiting areas, reading medical journals. They didn't care about their hands resting on concealed holsters. The official hospital record stated that Dominic Russo had succumbed to his wounds in the ER. To the police and the rival cartels, the King of Phoenix was dead. Only a select few knew the monster was sleeping in room 402. Kara hadn't left the hospital in 2 days. She was exhausted, living off black coffee and stolen packets of graham crackers. Despite Dr. Pendleton's furious protest to hospital administration, Vincent had made the arrangement extremely clear. Kara was the only person allowed to change Dominic's dressings, administer his medications, and monitor his vitals. The Mafia didn't trust the doctors. They only trusted the woman who broke the rules to save his life. She entered the dim, quiet room, the soft hum of the ventilator and the steady beep-beep of the heart monitor, the only sounds. The blinds were drawn tight. Dominic looked different in the soft light. The dirt and blood had been scrubbed away. His dark hair curled slightly against the stark white pillow. Without the tailored suits and the terrifying reputation, he just looked like a handsome, severely injured man. The intricate tattoos snaking up his left arm, symbols of power, violence, and loyalty, were the only reminders of who he truly was. Kara checked his IV lines, adjusting the flow of the broad-spectrum antibiotics. She moved to check his chest tube, leaning closely over him to inspect the surgical site. "You're hovering." Kara gasped, dropping the sterile tape in her hand. She stumbled backward, her heart leaping into her throat. Dominic's ice-blue eyes were open. They were clear, lucid, and entirely focused on her. The breathing tube had been removed hours ago, leaving his voice a deep, gravelly rasp. I was checking the drainage on your chest tube, Mr. Russo." Kara stammered frantically, trying to regain her professional composure. "Dominic," he corrected quietly. He tried to shift his weight and winced a sharp intake of breath, hissing through his teeth. "Don't move," Kara ordered, instinctively stepping forward and placing a firm hand on his uninjured shoulder. "You've had massive thoracic surgery. Your sternum is wired shut, and you are being held together by surgical staples and sheer stubbornness." Dominic looked down at her small hand on his shoulder, then back up to her face. A flicker of amusement danced in his cold eyes. "You're the nurse from the ER, the one who stabbed me with the needle. The needle decompressed your collapsed lung. It saved your life." "I know." He held her gaze, and for a terrifying second, Kara felt like she was being X-rayed. He was dissecting her, her posture, her fear, her defiance. "Why did you do it? Your boss gave up on me. My men were gone. You could have walked away, kept your hands clean." Kara swallowed hard, pulling her hand back. "I'm a nurse. My job is to keep people breathing. I don't care who they are or what they've done." "Noble," Dominic murmured, "but dangerously naive." He slowly lifted his right hand, ignoring the IV line pulling at his skin, and gestured for her to come closer. Reluctantly, Kara took a half step forward. "Those bullets weren't from a rival family," Dominic whispered, the effort clearly draining him. "The hit was too clean. The security cameras at my club magically glitched. My personal driver didn't show up. It was an inside job." Kara felt a chill run down her spine. "Why are you telling me this? I don't want to know anything about your business." "You need to know," Dominic stated, his voice hardening, "because the rat in my organization knows I was brought to this hospital. And if they find out I survived that table, they'll come here to finish the job," Kara whispered, horror dawning on her. "Exactly." Dominic's eyes narrowed. "I can trust Vinny. I can trust my inner circle guarding the door. But I can't trust the staff in this hospital. Medications can be swapped. IV lines can be poisoned. Air bubbles can be pushed into a vein." He reached out his warm, rough fingers, wrapping around Kara's wrist, not violently this time, but with an iron certainty. "You're my lifeline, Kara," he said, his thumb brushing over her racing pulse. "You don't let anyone else touch my meds. You don't let any other doctor in this room without you present. You are mine until I walk out of here." "I am an employee of St. Jude's," Kara said, trying to pull her hand away, but his grip was unyielding. "I am not your property. You made yourself a player in this game the second you brought me back from the dead," Dominic said softly, pulling her slightly closer. The scent of him, antiseptic, masking a deeply masculine musk of cedar and danger, was intoxicating. "If I die, Vinny will burn this hospital down and you along with it. If I live, I will give you the world. Do we understand each other?" Kara stared into the eyes of the devil, realizing with absolute terrifying clarity that there was no way out. The hospital doors were locked. The Mafia had the keys. "I understand," she whispered. Dominic released her wrist. his eyes fluttering closed as the exhaustion of the conversation pulled him back under. Good girl. Now, fix my pillows, they're like rocks. Kara stood frozen for a moment, her wrist still burning from his touch. She had saved a life, but as she looked at the sleeping mob boss, she knew she might have just traded her own soul for it. The real nightmare wasn't over, it was just beginning. The fourth floor of St. Jude Medical Center had become a fortress of sterile paranoia. It was day 4 of Dominic Russo's death, and the exhaustion was beginning to crack Kara's professional veneer. She had slept a total of 9 hours in the past 96, curled into a stiff vinyl recliner in the corner of room 402. Every time a monitor chimed or the air conditioning kicked on, she jolted awake, her eyes darting to the door where Vincent Castellano stood like a gargoyle. Dominic's recovery was a medical anomaly. A man with a shattered clavicle, a pierced lung, and a surgically repaired descending aorta should have been comatose on a ventilator. Instead, Dominic was propped up on 3 pillows, his jaw clenched against the agonizing pain he refused to accept narcotics for. Morphine makes you sloppy, he had growled on day 2, slapping the syringe out of her hand. If they come for me, I need to feel the bullet. So Kara managed his pain with high-dose intravenous Tylenol localized lidocaine patches and sheer stubborn willpower. It was 3:15 p.m. when the heavy oak door creaked open. Kara, who had been meticulously charting Dominic's fluid output, spun around. Standing in the doorway was Gregory, a float nurse from the intensive care unit. Kara recognized him, a quiet, mousy man with wire-rimmed glasses who usually worked the graveyard shift. Today he was pushing a small medication cart, a plastic IV bag dangling from his gloved hand. Afternoon, Kara." Gregory said, his voice a nervous, reedy pitch. He didn't look at the mobster in the bed, nor did he make eye contact with Vincent, who immediately stepped into the room, his hand resting casually inside his suit jacket. "Pharmacy sent up the new bag of Zosyn. Dr. Pendleton ordered an accelerated drip." Kara frowned. The broad-spectrum antibiotic was on a strict 12-hour schedule. She checked her digital tablet. "There's no new order in the system, Gregory. He's not due for another dose until 8 tonight." Gregory offered a tight synthetic smile. "Pendleton just called it in. System must be lagging. You know how IT is on the weekends. Let me just swap this out and I'll get out of your hair." He moved toward the IV pole next to Dominic's bed. Dominic lay perfectly still, his ice-blue eyes tracking the ICU nurse with the cold, unblinking intensity of a coiled viper. "Stop," Kara said, stepping directly into Gregory's path. "I manage his lines. Give me the bag." "Kara, please." Gregory chuckled, though a bead of sweat had formed on his upper lip. "It's hospital protocol. The nurse who signs out the narcotic or high-alert med has to hang it." "Zosyn isn't a high-alert medication." Kara countered her medical instincts, screaming that something was fundamentally wrong. She looked at the clear plastic bag in Gregory's hand. The pharmacy label was slightly crooked, but more concerning was the small, almost microscopic puncture mark on the rubber injection port at the bottom of the bag. It had been spiked with something else. Kara's blood ran cold. She remembered her pharmacology rotations. Potassium chloride. If pushed rapidly through an IV, a concentrated dose of KCl would stop the human heart in less than 30 seconds. It was untraceable, mimicking a massive natural heart attack. To a patient recovering from a massive chest wound, it would look exactly like a fatal complication. "Gregory," Kara said, her voice dropping to a dangerously calm whisper. "What is in that bag?" "It's the antibiotic Kara Jesus move." Gregory's facade cracked. Panic flared in his eyes. He shoved Kara hard against the edge of the bed and lunged for the IV hub connected to Dominic's arm. He never made it. Before Kara could even regain her balance, Vincent moved with a terrifying, unnatural speed for a man his size. His massive hand clamped around the back of Gregory's neck, lifting the smaller man entirely off the floor. Gregory shrieked as Vincent slammed him face first into the cinder block wall. The IV bag hit the floor, bursting open and pooling clear liquid across the linoleum. "Vinny, the arm." Dominic commanded from the bed. his voice a raspy whisper that carried the weight of absolute authority. Vincent didn't hesitate. He grabbed Gregory's right arm, twisting it sharply behind the nurse's back until a sickening snap echoed through the room. Gregory howled, collapsing into a sobbing, pathetic heap on the floor as Vincent pinned him down with a heavy Italian leather boot. "Who sent you?" Vincent roared, pressing his heel into the broken limb. "I don't know, I swear to God," Gregory sobbed, spitting blood onto the pristine floor. "A guy in a black trench coat met me in the parking garage. He said he'd kill my wife if I didn't hang the bag. He gave me 50 grand in cash." "What was in the bag?" Dominic asked, looking at Kara. Kara was shaking her hands, gripping the steel bed rail to keep herself upright. I think it was potassium. It would have stopped your heart instantly. The monitor would have just shown an arrhythmia." Dominic stared at the spilled liquid, a dark, lethal shadow crossing his face. The Mafia boss wasn't afraid. He was calculating. The game had officially breached the walls of his sanctuary. "Get him out of here, Vinny," Dominic said coldly. "Find out everything he knows, the description of the man, the exact time, the license plates of any cars in the garage. Then take out the trash." "No, please," Gregory begged as Vincent hauled him up by his unbroken arm, dragging him toward the door. "Kara, tell them I have a family." Kara squeezed her eyes shut and turned away. She was a healer, but she wasn't a fool. Gregory had walked into room 402 to commit murder. As the heavy door clicked shut behind the screaming nurse and the towering enforcer, a suffocating silence fell over the room. The adrenaline crash hit Kara like a physical blow. Her knees buckled, and she sank onto the edge of Dominic's bed, burying her face in her trembling hands. The sterile smell of the hospital now carried the faint metallic tang of violence. "Breathe, Kara." The voice was closer than she expected. She looked up. Dominic had shifted his weight, wincing as the staples in his chest pulled taut to reach out and wrap his large, rough hand over her shaking fingers. His skin was warm, burning with the residual fever of a healing body. "He was going to kill you." Kara whispered, the reality of the situation finally shattering her stoic composure. "Right in front of me. If I hadn't looked at the port." "But you did look," Dominic interrupted softly. His thumb traced a soothing rhythmic circle over her knuckles. "You saved my life. Again. I can't keep doing this." Dominic, a tear slipped free, carving a hot path down her cheek. "I'm a nurse. I fix broken bones. I hold people's hands when they get a bad diagnosis. I don't interrogate assassins. I don't watch men get their arms snapped." "I know," he said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming an intimate, gravelly purr that sent a shiver down her spine. "You don't belong in my world. You are light Kara. You are everything clean and good that I left behind a long time ago." He gently tugged her hand, pulling her slightly closer. The physical magnetism between them was undeniable, a heavy electric current that had been building since the moment he opened his eyes in Trauma Room 3. She should have pulled away. The medical ethics board would have stripped her license in a heartbeat, but looking into his bruised ice blue eyes, Kara felt anchored for the first time in 4 days. "Who is trying to kill you?" she asked, her voice barely a breath. Dominic's jaw tightened. He let go of her hand and leaned his head back against the pillows, staring at the ceiling tiles. "My father built the Russo Syndicate on loyalty, blood over everything. When he died, I took the throne. But not everyone agreed with the succession. The man in the parking garage, the hit at my club. It's not a rival family Kara. It's a coup." "Who?" Lorenzo Dominic spat the name like a curse. "My cousin. My underboss. He's the only one with the clearance to pull my security detail at the club. He's the only one who could get 50 grand in untraceable cash on an hour's notice to pay off a desperate nurse." Kara felt a knot of dread twist in her stomach. "If your own family is trying to kill you, who can you trust?" Dominic turned his head, his gaze locking onto hers. The intensity in his eyes stripped away all his armor, revealing the lonely, burdened king beneath the ruthless exterior. "Right now, Vincent. And you." He reached up his fingers, brushing a stray lock of hair behind her ear. His touch was incredibly gentle, a stark contrast to the violence he commanded. The pad of his thumb lingered on her jawline, mapping the soft skin. "I've lived my whole life surrounded by people who want my money, my power, or my head," Dominic murmured, his eyes dropping to her lips. "No one has ever fought for me just to keep me breathing. No one has ever stood between me and a loaded syringe without expecting a payout." Kara's heart hammered against her ribs, entirely unrelated to the fear of assassins. "I was just doing my job." "Liar," he whispered, a faint devastating smirk playing on his lips. "You crossed the line the moment you shoved that needle into my chest. You felt it too, Kara. The second my heart started beating again, it was tethered to yours." He leaned in the distance between them, evaporating. Kara was frozen, caught in the gravitational pull of a man who ruled by fear, but looked at her like she was his salvation. His lips brushed against hers, a fleeting, burning touch that tasted of danger and desperate, undeniable want. It was a promise. It was a claim. Before the kiss could deepen, the heavy oak door flew open. Vincent stormed in his suit jacket off his white shirt splattered with fresh, bright red droplets. His chest was heaving and his eyes were wild. "Boss," Vincent barked, ignoring the intimate proximity between Dominic and the nurse. "We have a massive problem." Dominic pulled back, the vulnerable man instantly vanishing, replaced by the lethal syndicate boss. "Report." The nurse talked before he choked on his own blood. Vincent said grimly, "Lorenzo knows you survived. He knows you're in this room. And he knows his little white coat assassin failed because the hospital scanners just logged Gregory running out of the emergency exit. So he sends a real hit squad." Dominic concluded, his mind already 3 steps ahead. "Worse," Vincent said, drawing his Glock and racking the slide with a terrifying metallic clack. "He called the feds. He anonymously tipped off the FBI task force that you're alive and vulnerable at St. Jude's. The feds want you in cuffs. Lorenzo's guys are dressing up as the extraction team. They're going to sweep the floor, kill you in your bed, and claim you resisted arrest. We have 10 minutes before this floor is swarming with fake badges and real bullets." Dominic threw the blankets off his legs. "Get my clothes." Kara stood up, horrified. "Are you insane? You had your chest cracked open 4 days ago. If you walk, you'll rip your internal sutures. You'll bleed out internally." "If I stay, I get a bullet in my brain," Dominic said, swinging his legs over the side of the bed. He grimaced, a sharp hiss escaping his teeth as the pain ripped through his torso. He gripped the edge of the mattress, his knuckles turning white. "Kara," Dominic said, looking up at her, his eyes blazing with a terrifying resolve. "I need you to unhook the monitors. Pull the IVs tape down my chest tube. We are leaving." "You can't transport with a water-sealed chest drainage unit," Kara argued, her medical training clashing violently with the mob's survival instincts. "If the tube gets pulled or the pressure changes, your lung will collapse again, and you will suffocate on the elevator ride down." "Then fix it," Dominic growled, pulling a blood-stained button-down shirt over his massive shoulders, leaving it unbuttoned over the thick white bandages wrapping his chest. "You're the smartest person in this room, Kara. Improvise." Gunfire, muffled but unmistakable, echoed from the floor below. The stairwells had been breached. Kara's mind raced. If they stayed, everyone died. If they moved, Dominic might die. She sprinted to the supply closet across the hall, ignoring Vincent's shouted warning to stay down. She ripped open cabinets, her hands flying over medical supplies, until she found what she needed, a Heimlich flutter valve. It was a small one-way plastic valve used in military combat zones for temporary chest tube transport. She darted back into the room. Vincent was loading a spare magazine into his weapon, positioning himself by the doorframe. "Hold still," Kara ordered Dominic. She disconnected the bulky plastic drainage box from his side, quickly attaching the small blue Heimlich valve to the end of his chest tube. "This will let air escape your chest, but won't let it back in. It buys you maybe an hour before fluid buildup becomes critical." An hour is all I need," Dominic said. He tried to stand, his legs weakened by massive blood loss and days of bed rest buckled. Before he could hit the floor, Vincent was there, hauling his boss's arm over his thick shoulder. "I got you, boss. We go out through the service elevator. It goes straight down to the morgue loading dock. I have a clean car waiting." More gunfire. Closer this time. The heavy glass doors of the VIP wing shattered in the distance. Men were shouting in the hallway. "Clear the rooms." "Find Russo," a voice echoed down the corridor. "That's not the FBI," Vincent sneered, recognizing the heavy Phoenix accent. "That's Lorenzo's crew. They brought the heavy artillery." Dominic looked at Kara. She was backed against the wall, clutching her medical tablet to her chest like a shield, her eyes wide with terror. "Vinny," Dominic commanded, his voice strained from the effort of standing. "Grab her!" "What?" Kara shrieked as Vincent's free hand clamped around her bicep, hauling her forward with the force of a freight train. "You're the only one who saw the fake nurse," Dominic said rapidly, his eyes locking onto hers as Vincent dragged them both toward the secondary exit door of the suite. "Lorenzo's men will execute every witness on this floor. If they find you, they will torture you to find out where I went, and then they will put a bullet in your head." "I can hide, I can tell them I don't know anything," Kara protested, digging her rubber-soled nursing shoes into the linoleum. "They won't care," Dominic stated a brutal truth that froze Kara's blood. "You saved my life, Kara. I protect what's mine. You're coming with us." Vincent kicked open the suite's fire exit. They spilled into the dimly lit concrete stairwell just as the main door to room 402 was kicked off its hinges. Suppressed submachine gun fire shredded Dominic's empty hospital bed, the bullets tearing the pillows to feathers and destroying the heart monitor Kara had been watching for 4 days. "Move, move, move," Vincent hissed, practically carrying Dominic down the stairs while shoving Kara ahead of him. They descended 3 flights in agonizing, breathless speed. Kara could hear Dominic gasping the Heimlich valve, hissing violently with every forced breath. His face had gone pale, and fresh, bright blood was beginning to bloom across the front of his bandages. His internal stitches were failing. They burst through the double doors of the basement level, entering the morgue. The air was frigid, smelling of formaldehyde and ozone. Row upon row of stainless steel refrigerated drawers lined the walls. "The doc is through there." Vincent pointed to an industrial bay door at the end of the hall. He keyed his radio. "Marco, pull the SUV to the south bay, now." "Vinny, wait!" Dominic grunted, stumbling to a halt against a stainless steel autopsy table. He was panting heavily, his hand pressed against his chest. "I'm bleeding out again." Kara immediately rushed to his side. She ripped open his shirt. The surgical site was a mess. Blood was pooling under the transparent dressing. "Your blood pressure is crashing," Kara said frantically, feeling for his pulse. It was thready racing at a terrifying speed. "You need a hospital, Dominic. You need a surgeon to close those arteries." Dominic looked down at her, a bloody, defiant smile crossing his face. "I don't need a hospital, sweetheart. I have you." Tires screeched outside. The heavy metal bay door began to roll upward, revealing a black bulletproof Cadillac Escalade. 2 of Vincent's loyal enforcers jumped out, aiming assault rifles back toward the stairwell to cover their escape. "Get him in the back," Vincent ordered, lifting Dominic effortlessly. Kara stood frozen in the morgue, the flashing taillights of the SUV illuminating the cold, dead space. The alarms in the hospital above were blaring. Sirens wailed in the distance. Her life, her quiet, predictable, noble life, was in ruins on the 4th floor. "Kara." She looked up. Dominic was in the back seat of the Escalade, leaning against the leather, fighting unconsciousness. He extended his bloody hand toward her. "Get in the car." It wasn't a threat. It was a plea. He was the monster of Phoenix, a man hunted by his own blood, bleeding out in the back of an SUV. But to Kara, he was her patient. And heaven help her, she was falling in love with him. She took a breath, stepped out of the hospital, and grabbed the Mafia Boss's hand. The door slammed shut, and the SUV tore into the night, leaving her old world burning behind them. The heavily armored custom Cadillac Escalade tore through the rain-slicked subterranean tunnels of Lower Wacker Drive. Outside, the city of Phoenix was a blur of neon and concrete, but inside the cavernous back cabin, the world had shrunk to the terrifying dimensions of a trauma ward. The air was overwhelmingly thick with the metallic copper scent of arterial blood mixed with the expensive leather of the vehicle's interior. Kara was entirely on her knees on the floorboards, her bare knees bruising against the custom mats as she pressed her entire body weight against a wad of sterile abdominal trauma dressings on Dominic's chest. "Keep your foot pinned to the floor!" "Marco!" Vincent roared from the passenger seat, his massive hand white-knuckling the dashboard grab handle while his eyes darted frantically to the rearview mirror. "They've got Phoenix PD squad cars blockading the interstate ramps. Take the service roads to I-90 West. We need to get out of the city limits now." Dominic's heavy head lolled against the seatback, his breathing reduced to a shallow, rapid series of gasps. The blue plastic Heimlich valve Kara had hastily taped to his chest tube was clicking frantically, a desperate mechanical rhythm, trying to keep his right lung from collapsing under the rising tide of internal pressure. But trapped air wasn't the primary enemy anymore. It was the bleeding. His skin, usually a warm olive tone, had turned a terrifying ashen gray. His skin was cold and covered in a clammy sweat, the textbook presentation of severe hypovolemic shock. "His radial pulse is practically gone," Kara shouted over the deafening roar of the 6.2-liter V8 engine, her fingers pressing desperately against his wrist. "His blood pressure is absolutely tanking. The internal sutures have completely failed. If we don't get massive fluid resuscitation into him and physically clamp that bleeding artery, he's going to code in the back of this car." "You have 5 minutes," Vincent barked, racking the slide on a fresh magazine for his Glock. They shot out of the city limits, the Escalade hydroplaning slightly, as Marco forcefully navigated the affluent tree-lined roads of Winnetka. The rain hammered against the reinforced ballistic glass. Suddenly, the SUV smashed directly through a set of heavy, unlatched wrought iron gates, the tires screeching and violently kicking up wet gravel as they skidded to a halt in the driveway of a massive dark estate. This was the Russo family's ultimate fallback, a heavily fortified, off-the-grid compound that didn't exist on any county zoning maps. Vincent and Marco threw the rear doors open, the freezing rain soaking them instantly as they hauled Dominic's massive frame out of the vehicle. Kara sprinted ahead of them, her blue scrubs completely saturated with his blood. They carried the syndicate boss around the side of the mansion and down a hidden flight of reinforced concrete stairs, punching a code into a heavy steel blast door. They stepped into a subterranean bunker. It wasn't a damp, cold dungeon. It was a state-of-the-art black market surgical suite. The room practically glowed under bright LED surgical halogens, lined with pristine stainless steel counters, a mechanical operating table, and high-end medical equipment that easily rivaled the trauma bays at St. Jude's Medical Center. "Put him on the table, center him under the lights," Kara ordered. The terrified rookie nurse had completely vanished, replaced entirely by a battle-hardened trauma responder operating on pure adrenaline. She pointed a blood-stained finger at Vincent. "Strip your jacket and wash your hands with the chlorhexidine at that sink. You're my scrub nurse tonight. Marco, I need massive transfusion protocols started yesterday. We have 6 units of O-negative blood in the medical sub-zero fridge," Vincent said, tossing his ruined suit jacket aside and scrubbing his hands raw. "Get it flowing through a rapid infuser," Kara commanded, her eyes scanning the glass front supply cabinets. She needed to open his chest cavity again. The sheer thought of performing invasive cardiothoracic surgery without a sterile field, an anesthesiologist, or a surgical team made her stomach pitch violently. But the flatlining vitals on the portable monitor didn't afford her the luxury of doubt. Kara's subterranean surgical arsenal, lidocaine 2% and midazolam local anesthetic, and a mild sedative. Dominic's blood pressure was too critically low to survive the induction of general anesthesia, DeBakey forceps, and hemostatic clamps. To physically locate and clamp the hemorrhaging arterial vessel, Bovie electrocautery pen. To burn and seal the smaller weeping capillaries surrounding the trauma zone. 4-0-proline, suture heavy-duty non-absorbable synthetic thread to permanently repair the internal arterial tear. Surgical hemostat, an oxidized cellulose mesh to pack the wound and encourage rapid blood clotting. "Dominic," Kara said, leaning closely over his face. His ice-blue eyes fluttered open, incredibly glassy and unfocused from the catastrophic blood loss. "Dominic, look at me. Stay with me. I have to open the incision. I have to physically find the artery and tie it off. You are going to feel this. It is going to be agony, but you have to hold still." A weak, bloody smile touched his pale lips. "Do your worst, Angel." She quickly pushed the midazolam into his IV line to take the edge off the terror, then heavily injected the lidocaine directly into the inflamed tissue around the surgical staples. Her hands moved with a frantic, beautiful precision. She grabbed a sterile staple remover and systematically popped the heavy metal brackets open. The moment the incision parted, a terrifying volume of dark, warm blood welled up, spilling over the sides of his chest. "See! Suction, get the Yankower suction tip in there now!" she yelled. Vincent moved instantly, ramming the suction tube deep into the chest cavity, the machine whining loudly as it cleared the massive pool of blood so Kara could actually see the anatomy. It was a nightmare of torn muscle tissue and failing ligatures. The violent physical exertion of escaping down the hospital stairwell had violently ripped a branch of his internal mammary artery. It was pulsing, bright oxygenated red, a tiny, lethal geyser of life draining away with every weak beat of his heart. "I see it," Kara muttered, grabbing a heavy hemostat. Her hands, which had been trembling for 4 straight days, suddenly went dead still. She plunged the steel clamp deep into the chaotic, slippery wound and clamped down hard on the severed vessel. The bleeding instantly stopped. Dominic let out a guttural, terrifying groan, his massive, heavily tattooed body arching violently off the steel table. He grabbed Kara's hip with his left hand, his grip bruising through her scrubs, grounding himself in the sheer blinding pain of the procedure. "I've got it. I've got the bleeder." Kara gasped, hot tears of sheer relief pricking her eyes, blurring her vision for a fraction of a second. "Vincent, put your hand over mine. Hold this clamp exactly here. Do not move a single millimeter or we lose him." For the next 2 agonizing hours, the bunker was silent, save for the rhythmic beeping of the monitor and the sharp hiss of the Bovie cautery pen. Kara meticulously placed 3 individual proline sutures around the crushed artery, permanently tying it off. She packed the surrounding tissue with Surgicel mesh and completely flushed his chest cavity with 2 liters of warm, sterile saline to prevent severe sepsis. By the time she carefully fired a new row of staples into his skin, closing the massive wound. For the second time, she was drenched in sweat and Dominic's blood. But the monitor told a story of absolute triumph. His heart rate had stabilized to a strong, steady 82 beats per minute, and the O-negative blood was restoring the color to his face. She collapsed backward onto a rolling medical stool, her legs turning to jelly, and dropped her blood-soaked latex gloves into a red biohazard bin. Dominic was unconscious, breathing evenly on his own without the mechanical hiss of the Heimlich valve. Vincent walked over his massive tattooed arms covered in dried blood. He held out a crystal glass filled with 3 fingers of neat-aged whiskey. "Mats, I've seen highly paid mob doctors with 30 years of surgical experience fold under half that kind of pressure," Vincent said, his rough voice thick with a deep, uncharacteristic reverence. "You just saved the King of Phoenix with a clamp of prayer and absolute ice in your veins." Kara took the heavy glass, her hands shaking so violently now that she spilled half of the amber liquid onto her ruined scrubs before taking a burning, desperate swallow. "I broke every single law in the medical registry tonight, Vincent." "The law didn't keep him breathing," Vincent said softly, looking from the sleeping mobster to the rookie nurse. "You did. Your family now, Kara." 48 hours passed in the subterranean clinic. The storm above ground was biblical. The news networks were running endless loops about the shootout at St. Jude Medical Center and the mysterious disappearance of the deceased Russo boss's body. The FBI had raided the hospital, interrogating Dr. Arthur Pendleton and Nurse Beatrice Gable, but both knew nothing. Kara barely left Dominic's side. The boundaries between nurse and patient had completely dissolved. When the fever spiked on the second night, she bathed his chest with cool water. When the nightmares of the ambush woke him thrashing and violent, she was the only one who could talk him down, holding his face until the ice-blue clarity returned to his eyes. On the morning of the third day, Dominic was sitting up on the edge of the surgical table dressed in a clean black t-shirt and dark jeans. He looked dangerous again. The vulnerability of the hospital was gone, replaced by the calculating predator. Vincent walked into the room, his face grim. He handed Dominic a cheap plastic burner phone. "It's Lorenzo," Vincent said. Dominic took the phone. He didn't put it to his ear. He hit the speaker button and set it on the metal tray table between him and Kara. "Lorenzo." Dominic said, his voice a low, lethal rumble. A sharp, arrogant laugh echoed from the small speaker. "Dominic, you stubborn bastard. I have to admit, when my guys hit the hospital and found an empty bed, I was impressed. But you're bleeding out in a hole somewhere. It's over." "You broke the cardinal rule, Enzo," Dominic said calmly, though Kara saw the muscles in his jaw ticking. "You brought the feds into family business. You shot up a hospital. You're a dead man." "I'm the new boss," Lorenzo spat back. "I've bought out the police commissioner. The docks are mine. The clubs are mine. And just to make sure you understand the New World Order, I paid a visit to your sister's apartment in Gold Coast." The air in the room vanished. Dominic didn't move, but the sheer radiating aura of violence that exploded from him made Kara physically step back. "Sophia says hello," Lorenzo taunted. A muffled, terrified sob echoed through the phone. "Here's the deal, cousin. You have until midnight to surrender yourself at the old Navy Pier warehouse. You come alone, you bleed out on my terms, and the girl lives. You try to run or you miss the deadline, I'll send her to you in boxes." The line went dead. Dominic sat in absolute silence for 10 seconds. Then he stood up. He didn't wince, he didn't stumble. The pain in his chest was entirely eclipsed by a cold, apocalyptic rage. "Vincent," Dominic ordered. "Boss. Mobilize the ghosts. Call the old guard, the men my father trusted. If they took Lorenzo's money, kill them. If they are loyal, tell them the king is awake. Arm the arsenal. Bring the heavy ordnance to the staging point. Suppressed rifles, body armor, incendiaries. Lock down the estate. No one comes in or out of Winnetka." "What about you?" Kara asked, her voice trembling, but her gaze locked on his. "You just had a major arterial repair. If you get into a firefight, the recoil of a gun alone could tear your sternum apart." Dominic turned to her, his eyes softening just a fraction. He stepped close, cupping her face in his large, warm hands. "I didn't survive that hospital bed to let a traitor butcher my family," Dominic whispered, his thumb brushing over her lower lip. "You gave me my life back, Kara. Now I have to go use it." "Then I'm going with you," she stated. Dominic frowned, a flash of genuine fear crossing his features. "Absolutely not. You stay here. You stay safe. I am the only person who knows how to keep you from bleeding to death if those staples pop," Kara argued, her heart pounding. "I'm not a liability, Dominic. I'm your insurance policy. And I'm not letting you die out there alone." Dominic stared at her, seeing the fierce, unyielding fire in her eyes. The rookie nurse who had trembled in Trauma Room 3 was gone. In her place stood a woman forged in the fires of his world. He leaned down and kissed her hard, desperate, and claiming. It wasn't the fleeting promise of the hospital room. It was a devastating seal of ownership and devotion. When he pulled away, they were both breathless. "Vinny," Dominic called out, his eyes never leaving Kara's. "Get the nurse a bulletproof vest." The Navy Pier warehouse district was a ghost town at 11:45 p.m. The fog rolling off Lake Michigan was thick, swallowing the moonlight and casting long, sinister shadows across the corrugated steel buildings. Lorenzo stood in the center of the massive empty warehouse, flanked by 30 heavily armed mercenaries. Bound to a wooden chair in the center of the room was Sophia Russo, weeping quietly, a gag secured tightly in her mouth. "He's not coming," one of Lorenzo's lieutenants muttered, checking his watch. "He's probably dead in a ditch." "He'll come," Lorenzo sneered, racking the slide of his pistol. "Dominic is predictable. Blood over everything." Suddenly, the massive bay doors at the far end of the warehouse groaned open. The mercenaries raised their weapons, the red dots of laser sights piercing the gloom. A single figure walked through the fog. Dominic Russo wore a long black wool overcoat that concealed the bandages wrapping his torso. He carried no visible weapon. He walked with a slow, deliberate, terrifyingly calm stride, stopping 30 feet from Lorenzo's firing squad. "Well, well," Lorenzo laughed, stepping forward. "The ghost walks. You look like hell, Dom." "Let Sofia go, Lorenzo," Dominic said, his voice echoing off the high tin ceiling. "This is between you and me." It's between me and the throne," Lorenzo corrected. He raised his gun, aiming it squarely at Dominic's chest. "Any last words, cousin?" Dominic offered a chilling, blood-freezing smile. "Look up." Before Lorenzo could process the command, the skylights of the warehouse shattered in a deafening rain of glass. Vincent and 10 of the Russo family's most elite loyalist enforcers repelled from the roof, their suppressed assault rifles whispering death into the room. Simultaneously, the side doors of the warehouse blew open, and Marco's team flooded the floor. It wasn't a shootout. It was an execution. Lorenzo's mercenaries, expecting a dying man to surrender, were entirely unprepared for a tactical military-grade strike. Within 30 seconds, 20 of the traitors were dead on the concrete. Lorenzo panicked. He grabbed Sofia by the hair, hauling her out of the chair and pressing his gun to her temple. "Hold fire! Hold fire!" Lorenzo screamed, backing toward the rear exit. "I'll blow her brains out, Dom, I swear to God." The gunfire ceased. The surviving traitors dropped their weapons, realizing they were outmatched. The warehouse was dead silent, save for the moans of the dying. Dominic didn't blink. He slowly unbuttoned his overcoat, reaching into the inner pocket. "You think you can draw faster than I can pull this trigger?" Lorenzo panicked, his hand shaking violently against Sofia's head. "I don't have to," Dominic said coldly. From the catwalk above and behind Lorenzo, a shadow moved. Kara, wearing a black tactical vest over her scrubs, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird, raised the heavy black taser Vincent had given her. She had crept up the emergency fire stairs, while Dominic provided the distraction. She didn't hesitate. She didn't overthink the medical ethics. She aimed for the exposed patch of Lorenzo's neck and pulled the trigger. The 2 barbed darts struck true. 50,000 volts of electricity ripped through Lorenzo's nervous system. His body went entirely rigid, his eyes rolling back into his skull. His fingers spasmed, firing his gun harmlessly into the ceiling before he collapsed to the floor like a sack of dead weight, dropping Sofia safely. Dominic moved instantly, catching his sister and pulling her into a tight, protective embrace. He kissed the top of her head, murmuring in Italian before handing her off to Vincent. He then walked over to Lorenzo's twitching body. Dominic pulled a sleek silver 1911 pistol from his waistband, looked down at the man who had torn his family apart, and fired 2 shots into his chest. The coup was over. Dominic looked up at the catwalk. Kara was standing there staring at the gun in his hand, her chest heaving. He dropped the magazine from the weapon, cleared the chamber, and placed it on a nearby crate. He walked up the metal stairs, his heavy boots ringing out in the quiet warehouse. When he reached her, he didn't say a word. He pulled her against his chest, burying his face in her neck, breathing her in. Kara wrapped her arms around him, feeling the steady, strong thumping of the heart she had fought so hard to restart. "It's over," Dominic whispered into her hair. "You're safe." "So are you," she replied, her voice thick with emotion. They walked out of the warehouse together, leaving the carnage to the cleaners. Kara Jennings had walked into St. Jude Medical Center as a rookie trauma nurse trying to save lives. She walked out of the Phoenix underworld as the undisputed queen of the syndicate, tethered forever to the devil whose life she had saved and whose heart she had stolen. Did Kara make the right choice by crossing the ultimate line, or did she just trade one terrifying reality for another? The line between saving a life and selling your soul is razor thin in the Phoenix underworld. If you were hooked by this intense mafia romance, hit that like button right now. Share this story with your friends who love high-stakes drama, unexpected twists, and dangerous romance. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss our next gripping real-life storytelling video. Drop a comment below. Would you have saved Dominic Russo? See you next time.